The sun had barely risen over Washington, D.C. when the political winds began to shift. Headlines that morning screamed controversy. Yet again. But this time, it wasn't just the usual partisan squabbling. Something deeper, more sinister, was brewing within the judicial branch of the United States government. Pam Bondi, the recently appointed Attorney General under President Donald Trump's administration, was sitting in her office at the Department of Justice. A former Florida Attorney General with a reputation for fearlessness and loyalty, Pam had never been one to back down from a fight. Her Florida drawl softened only slightly over the years, but her words still carried iron resolve. Her assistant, Jordan, rushed in holding a thick manila folder and an iPad with live updates. "Ma'am," he said with an edge of urgency. "You need to see this." Pam turned down the classical music playing in her office and took the folder. Inside were classified internal memos, whistleblower statements, and digital logs indicating that Chief Justice John Roberts had allegedly been involved in an off-the-books correspondence with a select group of appellate judges. The messages revealed a secret initiative to undermine the independence of the judiciary, a covert effort to pressure certain judges into ruling against executive actions favored by the current administration. Pam's lips tightened. She had known Roberts as a man of principles, even if ideologically different. But if this was true, it wasn't just unethical. It was treasonous. "This better be airtight," Pam said, thumbing through the evidence. "It's more than that," Jordan replied. "We've cross-checked everything. These communications go back 6 months, possibly longer. The pattern is clear. There's manipulation of bench assignments, strategic case reassignments, and a push to issue injunctions on executive orders related to immigration, tech regulation, and even defense policy." Pam Bondi had always been a loyal soldier, but she was loyal to the law first. And if a Supreme Court justice, especially the Chief Justice, was abusing his power to interfere with other branches of government, the country needed to know. President Donald Trump sat in the Oval Office with his inner circle when Pam Bondi arrived unannounced. Trump raised an eyebrow but gestured for her to speak freely. Bondi wasted no time explaining the magnitude of the situation. "This isn't just political sabotage, Mr. President. This is a betrayal of the Constitution. If these judges are coordinating with Roberts to stall your executive agenda, we're talking about a full-blown judicial coup." Trump leaned back, uncharacteristically quiet. Then, in classic Trump fashion, he broke the silence. "Take him down," he said bluntly. "If he's playing kingmaker behind the bench, the people deserve to know." Bondi nodded. "I'll need full independence. This will get ugly." "You've got it," Trump said. "Make it count." The investigation begins. With the president's green light, Pam Bondi assembled a task force within the DOJ named Operation Gavelstorm, a codename meant to stay under wraps until the moment of public disclosure. The team comprised some of the brightest minds in constitutional law, cyber forensics, and judicial oversight. She called in prosecutors from outside D.C. to minimize leaks. The media, for now, had no idea what was coming. Pam personally met with the whistleblowers, 2 appellate clerks who had risked their careers to come forward. They spoke of intimidation, veiled threats, and subtle coercion by senior judges who had allegedly received guidance from Roberts. "We were told to ensure that national security executive orders were put on indefinite hold," one of them confessed. "That's not judicial review, that's sabotage." As days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. Roberts, unaware of the storm about to hit him, continued presiding over sessions at the Supreme Court with his usual poise. But behind the scenes, the DOJ had compiled a dossier of communications, logs, and testimony strong enough to trigger a congressional inquiry. Still, Bondi knew the most dangerous moment was ahead, going public. The doors of the Rayburn House office building creaked open to a sea of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Pam Bondi stood at the heart of it, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals and her deputy, Jordan. Word had leaked, a controlled drop through an anonymous source to a major media outlet, and Washington was now ablaze with theories. Some believed it was partisan vengeance. Others whispered the words no one dared say out loud: constitutional crisis. The House Judiciary Committee had called an emergency hearing after Bondi submitted a preliminary report detailing judicial misconduct, with John Roberts named directly. It was a historic first. No Chief Justice had ever been investigated while still in office, let alone for alleged subversion of another branch of government. As she sat down before the committee, the room filled with tension. Committee members looked grave, as if they understood they were walking the edge of a precipice. Cameras broadcast live. Americans across the country paused their day to witness what felt like the first act of a national reckoning. Chairman Reed Garrison, a moderate Republican with an independent streak, cleared his throat. Attorney General Bondi, you understand the gravity of the claims you are about to make? I do, she replied, her voice steady, confident. You are accusing the Chief Justice of the United States of attempting to undermine the authority of the executive branch? I'm accusing him of violating the foundational principle of judicial independence by coordinating with lower courts to obstruct the lawful actions of the president. We have proof. And we have whistleblowers. A murmur spread through the chamber. Pam opened the first folder. Exhibit A, encrypted email logs between Chief Justice Roberts and two appellate judges in the Ninth Circuit, instructing them on case management strategies to delay rulings on immigration bans. She tapped the second folder. Exhibit B, testimony from whistleblowers corroborating the existence of a judicial roundtable hosted in secret, off federal grounds with the purpose of aligning rulings to politically damage the current administration. And Exhibit C, analysis from independent cybersecurity experts confirming the chain of custody on the digital evidence and its authenticity. Chairman Garrison was visibly shaken. You're asking us to consider the unthinkable, that the Chief Justice violated the separation of powers deliberately and secretly. I'm not asking. I'm showing you. The nation reacts. That night, every major news network replayed the footage on a loop. CNN ran the headline, Shocking Claims, Pam Bondi versus John Roberts. Fox News called it The Deep Bench, How the Judiciary Waged War on Trump. Twitter exploded. Hashtag Roberts Resign and hashtag Bondi Bombshell were trending globally. In small towns and big cities alike, the American public was split. Some viewed Bondi as a hero, a modern-day Joan of Arc standing alone against a shadowy elite. Others believed she was on a politically motivated witch hunt, using selective leaks to damage one of the nation's most respected legal minds. Protests erupted outside the Supreme Court. Supporters of Bondi waved signs that read "No Kings on the Bench" and "The Constitution isn't optional." Meanwhile, defenders of Roberts rallied with posters proclaiming "Defend the court" and "Integrity under attack." Roberts breaks his silence. 3 days later, John Roberts addressed the nation from the Supreme Court press chamber. Flanked by silence and heavy with gravitas, the Chief Justice denied the allegations outright. I have always held the judiciary to the highest standard of independence. Any claim that I sought to manipulate or direct other judges is false, defamatory, and a danger to the integrity of our legal system. He paused. This is an attack on the very balance our founders envisioned. If we allow politics to consume justice, we risk the death of democracy. Pam Bondi watched the statement from her office. She didn't flinch. You're good at speeches, she muttered at the screen, but I've got the receipts. The pressure was mounting. What began as an internal investigation had now ignited a full-blown national debate, and both sides were preparing for war. Inside the Supreme Court building, beneath the dome where justice had reigned for centuries, silence had turned to whispers. The once unshakable confidence of the justices began to crack. Even the most stalwart defenders of Roberts, Justices Kagan, Barrett, and Gorsuch, had begun holding private conversations, far from prying ears. Pam Bondi, meanwhile, wasn't backing down. She launched a special prosecutor unit independent of the Department of Justice hierarchy to avoid claims of political interference. At the helm was Benjamin Hartman, a veteran prosecutor who had famously taken on white-collar corruption in the early 2000s. With him came a dozen federal investigators, court reporters, and a team of cyber forensic experts who traced the judicial communications to 2 encrypted servers. One was hosted through a private nonprofit believed to be linked to the Judicial Ethics Forum, an organization Roberts had once chaired. The emails weren't smoking guns, they were flamethrowers. Dozens of messages between Roberts and a closed group of federal judges revealed explicit strategies for slowing the pace of judicial review, amplifying federal injunctions, and containing executive overreach. Some of the language, though carefully coded, pointed to a desire to control not just the law, but the timing of its application. It was a chess game, and Roberts had been playing a long one. Pam now faced an impossible task: preserve judicial integrity while confronting the highest judge in the land. A secret meeting. One rainy night, Pam received a confidential message through secure channels. It came from Justice Clarence Thomas, one of the longest-serving members of the court and a constitutional originalist. They met in an undisclosed federal location. Thomas, visibly disturbed, sat down opposite her. "Pam," he said, "I can't be seen supporting you, not publicly. But you're not wrong. John's been drifting for years. He started believing the court had to correct the balance of government, not just interpret law. He always framed it as preservation, but really it was control." Pam leaned in. "Will you testify, even off the record?" He shook his head. "I'll give you names, meetings, dates. But if I testify openly, the court collapses. And no matter how this ends, we can't leave the nation without a judiciary." Pam understood. It wasn't fear. Clarence Thomas was no coward, it was responsibility. He was trying to shield the institution, even if the man leading it had betrayed its principles. Before she left, he handed her a small notebook. "This is from my clerk. He kept logs. You'll find what you need." Back at the DOJ, Pam cross-referenced the notebook with digital records. Everything matched. Meanwhile, under mounting pressure, 3 appellate judges implicated in the communications quietly resigned. One, Judge Elsie Wren of the Ninth Circuit, left a scathing parting letter claiming she was misled by ideological pressure and blackmailed by the promise of elevation to the Supreme Court if Roberts' plan succeeded. That letter leaked, and that's when the Senate Judiciary Committee got involved. Senator Blake Harrow, a centrist Democrat from Ohio, announced he would lead a bipartisan inquiry into judicial misconduct at the highest levels. He praised Bondi's courage while calling for restraint until a full review could be made. But the American public was done waiting. Protests intensified. Petitions demanding Roberts' resignation reached 2.5 million signatures in a week. Meanwhile, conservative grassroots groups and constitutional purists backed Bondi with slogans like, "Let the law be law," and "No bench above the Constitution." Inside the White House, President Trump was watching with satisfaction. But even he underestimated the scale of what Pam had unearthed. The turning point, a federal judge in Texas, appointed by Obama, ruled that there was sufficient probable cause to allow access to Roberts' private communications and financial records. It was unprecedented. No sitting Chief Justice had ever been forced to surrender personal data for investigation. In a last-ditch move, Roberts filed an injunction against his own subpoena. That was the breaking point. Pam stood before the cameras in front of the DOJ the next morning and delivered a statement that would be quoted for decades. "When the judge becomes the accused, and the law bends for no man, not even the highest gavel in the land, then justice is finally alive. This isn't about Trump. It isn't about me. It's about whether we still believe in a constitution that applies to everyone, including the Chief Justice." Washington was no stranger to scandal. But this was different. For the first time in American history, a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was now officially under investigation, with his communications subpoenaed and his authority challenged not by the executive branch, but by the law itself. Pam Bondi wasn't just in the fight of her career. She was on the front lines of a constitutional revolution. The Office of Legal Counsel, after weeks of legal wrangling, issued a formal opinion that the Supreme Court, while a co-equal branch, was not immune from investigation when its own internal processes violated federal law. It was a landmark declaration, one that would echo through civics textbooks for decades. Roberts, cornered, appealed the decision to the D.C. Circuit, but Judge Elaine Herrera, in a 97-page ruling, denied the motion. "Judicial independence is sacred," she wrote, "but it is not the same as judicial immunity. If the Constitution is to be preserved, it must apply even to those sworn to interpret it." Bondi watched the news break in real time with her team. Jordan, her assistant, grinned. "That's checkmate, isn't it?" "Not yet," Pam said. "But we're on the last move. The deal on the table." Back-channel talks erupted between Roberts' legal team and senior DOJ officials. Word came through intermediaries that Roberts might consider stepping down quietly, if given a face-saving exit. But Bondi wasn't interested in deals. "This isn't about protecting his legacy," she told President Trump in the Oval Office. "It's about restoring trust." Trump, hands steepled under his chin, looked at her carefully. "You really don't want the win handed to you?" Pam shook her head. "I want the truth on the record. I want America to see it, to remember it. If we don't make an example of this now, someone else will do it again. And next time, it'll be worse. The president nodded. Then finish it. It happened on a gray Thursday morning. In a special joint session between the Senate and House Judiciary Committees, Pam Bondi presented sealed testimony from multiple whistleblowers now under full federal protection. One was a former SCOTUS clerk. Another, a senior IT technician with access to Roberts' secure server room. And the third, most shocking of all, was a sitting federal judge who agreed to speak under oath and on the record. Judge Alonzo Baird, appointed during the Bush era and known for his apolitical rulings, testified that Roberts had convened secret meetings in the early mornings in a private Georgetown residence. These weren't casual strategy sessions. They were deliberate attempts to slow or reroute judicial cases involving executive actions tied to border control, pandemic emergency powers, and tech regulations. He believed the executive branch was becoming authoritarian, Judge Baird said, and he felt it was the judiciary's job to act as a moderating force, not just through decisions but through delay. He never said it aloud, but we all understood if we couldn't win legally, we'd win with time. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The testimony shook even those who had once defended Roberts. His motivations, though perhaps rooted in concern, had translated into something far more dangerous: systemic manipulation of a branch of government to interfere with another. The following day, the New York Times ran the headline, "The gavel falls, judge admits to strategic sabotage of executive branch." The public awakens. Across the country, Americans were glued to their screens. Truck drivers in Nebraska. Teachers in Atlanta. Soldiers in Fort Bragg. Nurses in San Diego. They weren't just watching a political saga anymore, they were witnessing history unfold. In Philadelphia, someone placed a handwritten note on the steps of Independence Hall. For the Constitution to live, no one can stand above it. Not even the Chief Justice. Pam Bondi's approval ratings soared. Even her critics on the left had to admit her courage was undeniable. She hadn't just fought for an administration. She had fought for accountability. The final blow. After a night of tense negotiations and mounting public pressure, John Roberts released a handwritten letter to the American people. In it, he acknowledged the investigation, admitted to judgment errors in seeking to guide lower courts beyond traditional roles, and announced his immediate resignation from the Supreme Court. "I believed I was protecting democracy," he wrote, "but I failed to see that in doing so, I was endangering its very foundation. For that, I step aside." The nation was stunned. Pam Bondi watched the statement with tears in her eyes, not out of joy, but because she understood what it meant. She hadn't just brought down a man. She defended the Republic. And in doing so, she had reminded America that no title, no robe, no office is above the Constitution. John Roberts' resignation letter went viral within seconds. Cable news stations ran wall-to-wall coverage. Editorials flowed in from every major publication, some somber, others celebratory. The Washington Post called it the greatest reckoning of judicial overreach in American history. The Wall Street Journal dubbed Pam Bondi the unlikely defender of the Constitution. Inside the Department of Justice, the mood was different, calm, almost somber. Pam Bondi sat quietly in her office watching the press conference led by the acting Chief Justice, Samuel Alito, who assured the nation that the court would return to its core mission of interpreting the law without bias or agenda. "We are humbled," he said, and reminded that even the highest courts must remain servants of the people, not the architects of their fate. The backlash and the balance. Of course, not everyone applauded. Progressive groups accused Bondi of orchestrating a politically charged takedown. Late-night comedians mocked the idea of a Trump-aligned attorney general claiming to preserve democracy. Harvard law professors argued about precedent. Commentators questioned whether this could now open the door to future political interference in the judiciary. Pam took it all in stride. "This was never about politics," she said during an interview with 60 Minutes. "It was about accountability. If we ever allow anyone to play puppet master with our Constitution, whether they're wearing a robe or sitting behind a desk in the West Wing, then we lose the very thing we swore to protect." Her words hit home. Bondi, who once served as Florida's Attorney General and had her critics in the national spotlight, had now rewritten her legacy. She wasn't just another political appointee. She had become the face of a new standard: courage without compromise. Congress steps in. Weeks after Roberts' resignation, Congress passed the Judicial Transparency and Independence Act, a bipartisan piece of legislation that introduced new oversight mechanisms. It mandated annual anonymous ethics reviews for federal judges, Public disclosure of non-case-related judicial communications. A secure and independent whistleblower channel within the federal court system. Pam testified in favor of the bill. So did Judge Alonzo Baird. Both their voices lent weight to the call for lasting reform. Meanwhile, Roberts, now retired, retreated from public life, taking up quiet residence in Maine. He refused interviews, but one photograph surfaced of him walking along the coast with a book in hand, the Federalist Papers. The future of the court. President Trump, emboldened by the public's support for Bondi, nominated Justice Edith Hawthorne, a well-respected constitutionalist from Texas, to fill Roberts' vacant seat. She was confirmed with a rare 84-16 vote, drawing praise from both sides of the aisle. In her confirmation speech, Justice Hawthorne quoted Abraham Lincoln. "Let every American, every lover of liberty, swear by the blood of the Revolution never to violate in the least particular the laws of the country." She then added, "Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Pam Bondi's final move. With the case closed, the investigation complete, and the reforms underway, Pam Bondi did something no one expected. She resigned. In a press briefing outside the Justice Department, she looked resolute. "My mission was never to make a career here. It was to right a wrong. And now that the work is done, it's time to pass the torch." Reporters shouted questions. "Will you run for office? What next? Will you write a book?" Pam smiled. "I think I'll go home. Maybe open a small law school. Teach the next generation that defending democracy isn't about power. It's about responsibility." Legacy. Years later, school children would read about the case in their civics classes. The Bondi precedent, as it came to be called, became shorthand for one thing: no one is above the Constitution. Pam Bondi, a name once synonymous with cable news debates and fiery panel shows, would be remembered as the woman who didn't blink when America needed someone to stand. And in homes across the nation, from the quiet fields of Iowa to the high-rises of New York, Americans remembered a time when their institutions were tested. And they survived. Because one woman dared to say no.